sentences is unacceptable. No person deserves to be a victim of crime, and I appreciate your being here to share your stories. But the majority's attempt to use this hearing to prop up the Trump-Vance campaign is not even thinly veiled. There is no intent whatsoever to disguise the purpose of this hearing. Not only is the majority desperate to attack the surging popularity of Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, but they are well aware that if they want to hold a hearing about the current levels of crime in the U.S., that hearing would show that crime has been declining dramatically and steadily under the Biden-Harris administration. The murder rate in particular is down sharply this year in cities across America, as it was during the past 2 years. Meanwhile, red states continue to have murder rates that are higher than those of blue states. 7 of the 10 states with the highest murder rates are red states, and 8 of the 10 most dangerous cities in the U.S. are in red states. As we hold this hearing about the alleged consequences of so-called soft-on-crime policies, Republicans and their leader, Donald Trump, continue to call for pardons for the January 6th defendants who violently attempted to overthrow our government on that bloody day 3 years ago. And they continue to try to help Trump avoid accountability for his own serial criminal conduct in his numerous court cases by attacking the prosecutors, the judges, and the legal system itself. Last Congress, under Democratic control, we advanced important public safety legislation, such as the Victim Act, which would have provided critical funding to law enforcement to solve murders and other violent crimes. Republicans opposed it. Now that they are in the majority, Republicans have called for abolishing or defunding the ATF, and they have repeatedly attacked the FBI and the Department of Justice through endless conspiracy-focused hearings and closed-door investigations that border on harassment. It is Republicans who oppose sensible gun safety legislation that would curb the flow of illegal guns and stem the tide of gun violence in America. It has only been a week since the latest school shooting in which a teenager used an AR-15 to take the lives of 2 students and 2 teachers at a school in Appalachia, Georgia, a place where students, parents, and teachers have a right to expect that they will be protected. Republicans have made protection of deadly assault weapons a top priority this Congress, that they will be protected, the protection of students. Yet they have the audacity to claim that it is Democrats who are soft on crime. Democrats have focused on actual legislation and policies that keep Americans safe. Democrats are keeping guns out of the wrong hands, addressing the root causes of violence, and investing in law enforcement. House Democrats have secured substantially more money for public safety investments in their districts, such as hiring police officers, than House Republicans have secured, in some cases as much as 15 times more. This disparity should tell us which party is more focused on public safety and which is soft on crime. The data also shows us that criminal justice reform policies work. In 2018, both parties were able to unify behind the First Step Act, a comprehensive sentencing reform package that gave federal inmates the opportunity to earn time off their sentences for completing productive courses designed to prevent them from reoffending. This legislation has been a resounding success, as the recidivism rate for inmates released early under the First Step Act is far lower than that of other inmates. And in the cities in this country that have enacted bail reform by reducing or eliminating the use of cash bail systems, study after study has shown that the reforms have not led to an increase in crime. Of course, no crime prevention or reform strategy is perfect, and there will always be individuals who slip through the cracks and continue to break the law. That is what happened with the individual who snatched Ms. Kiefer's purse in 2008 when he was in the Back on Track program in San Francisco. But when then District Attorney Harris discovered that the program had mistakenly admitted undocumented immigrants who were not eligible for jobs in the United States, she quickly closed that loophole. What the majority won't tell you is that the person who took Ms. Kiefer's purse is the only undocumented person who was admitted into the program and failed to successfully complete it. Instead, my Republican colleagues paint all immigrants with the same broad brush as the ones who break the law, this week going so far as to make up fake and preposterous crimes that they claim immigrants are committing, such as killing and eating pets. Not only is this sort of demonization of immigrants dangerous, but it flies in the face of the data, which tells us that U.S.-born citizens are nearly twice as likely to be arrested for violent crimes as those who are in the country illegally. That is why we do not legislate by anecdote. While it is important to hear from crime victims and other impacted persons, we must focus our policymaking on current data and on verifiable trends. We must also focus on what we know works to combat crime, a combination of accountability and prevention that addresses not just punishment, but also the root causes of crime, such as poverty, drug addiction, and structural inequalities. When and if my Republican colleagues are willing to have serious conversations about criminal justice policy, as we did when we passed the First Step Act in 2018 and the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act last Congress, I will happily join them. But this hearing is nothing more than a campaign ad. I do not endorse this message. Thank you, and I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record, and today's witnesses will now be introduced. We appreciate all of you being here. We'll begin with Mr. Brian Ingram over here. And Mr. Ingram is a chef and owner of Purpose Restaurants based in St. Paul, Minnesota. He has over 30 years of experience in the restaurant industry. In addition to serving customers, Purpose Restaurants is focused on serving the community, having provided more than 300,000 meals, 2 million pounds of food, and $225,000 in financial assistance to those in need since 2019. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Ingram. Ms. Kiefer, Miss Amanda Kiefer, is a former San Francisco resident and crime victim. In 2008, she was attacked by an illegal alien in San Francisco who had been arrested on drug charges but was released to a job program instead of being incarcerated. We have Mr. Jim Schultz, is the president of the Minnesota Private Business Council, an organization that advocates for policies that promote job growth, business creation, entrepreneurship, and broad-based well-being for Minnesota's workers and their families. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Kessler, Mr. Jim Kessler, is Executive Vice President for Policy and a co-founder of Third Way, a nonprofit organization and think tank. He previously served as a House and Senate staffer to Senator Chuck Schumer. We welcome all of our witnesses today, and I thank you for appearing. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your hand, your right hand? Do each of you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? We'll let the record please reflect the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative, and you may be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and you'll see there's a timer in front of you. And at some point, if you start rolling on past 5 too much, I'll gently tap a reminder. And if you go too far, then I'll whack it pretty good and remind you that you need to wrap up. And it's not to be rude or nobody will be upset with you. We're just trying to keep this thing moving in an orderly fashion. And so we're going to begin now with you, Mr. Ingram, for your 5 minutes.
Chairman Biggs and members today, one, we're just so grateful to be here and have this opportunity. I'm not going to talk to you about data. I'm going to talk to you about real life experiences. And really my prayer for today is that open hearts and open minds. I'm passionate about our community. We've stepped up since 2019 to create a better community. We set out with our name of our restaurant, Purpose Restaurants, to have a safe, inclusive environment. We reached out to all different community members to understand what that looks like. We have made it our calling to be of service to our community. We say we want to share meals with people that don't look like us, that don't believe like us, because that's what's important. I moved to Minnesota in 2012 from New York. In those first 5 or 6 years, I had one burglary that happened. Since 2019 and beyond, I know we're north of 12 burglaries. I cannot tell you how many incidences at one of our restaurants in downtown St. Paul that we've had overdoses, that we've had people on our patios overturning them. I can't tell you how many times we've seen violent acts taking place in our restaurants. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard from our district attorney that we've reduced charges. We are letting them off. We reduced them to under $1,000, even though our expenses were far greater than that. The gentleman sitting behind me, Jeff, is my business partner. His son, Johnny, died of a fentanyl overdose above our restaurant. His drug dealer, we had all of his information. We gave it to the police. That drug dealer was never arrested, and he is still on our streets today. These violent crimes and acts that happen in our restaurants and within our homes. St. Paul, it was my home from the time I moved there, except for a short time I was in Minneapolis. We moved after our car was recently stolen, houses broken into. My son's daycare in St. Paul, Minnesota, recently had young kids stole a car again. I believe it had happened several times, and crashed it, but for the grace of God, into a tree that stopped them from going into the playground where 3-year-olds are playing on our streets. This happens day in and day out in our community, and nothing is being done about it. I can't tell you how many times I've listened to St. Paul police officers. This man has been arrested over 50 times, Brian. I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do. He got back out, came back, burglarized us again, got back out within 24 hours, I'm told, and burglarized us again. So we can talk about data, we can talk about how you can manipulate data, we can talk about political parties. None of that means anything to me. What matters to me is that my community is safe. What matters to me is when I get a call saying, can you help pay for our funeral? My daughter was killed, Trinity, by random gunfire in St. Paul. What matters to me is that our streets and our community are taken care of. And our first priority as citizens, as public services, it's to serve our community. And that's what I'm praying for that happens today. Hearts and minds are open. This is not a political issue. This is a human issue, and we need to focus on human beings.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Appreciate that. And now, Ms. Kiefer, will recognize you for your 5 minutes.
Thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak about my experience. I was a victim of crime in San Francisco back in 2008. I was robbed and my skull was fractured in 2 places. I had about a dozen staples in the back of my head and nearly lost my hearing in my left ear. The guy that did it was a convicted felon, illegal immigrant that should have been in jail. Instead, as Congressman Nadler mentioned, he was enrolled in this job training program on the taxpayer dollar for jobs he couldn't legally hold. And that was just crazy to find out afterwards. You know, this type of program is happening throughout the country too. That program was touted as a success, and it's hard to believe that there aren't more than one illegal enrolled in that. And journalists and politicians like to repeat the statistic that immigrants commit less crime than Americans, even if not manipulated. I think I find that kind of irrelevant. If we're letting in any more criminals, that's one too many. We already have enough criminals in this country, and we really do little to keep them from committing more crimes. Certain politicians no longer hide their commitment to that Marxist principle that criminals are just victims of capitalism, that somehow a job or a handout will eliminate their tendency towards violent crime. And jails and prisons have become a revolving door. no bail laws, lighter sentencing, and identity politics-driven leniency put violent people on the streets again to harm others. There's no fear of being caught or, any reason to stop committing crimes. Our vice president encouraged defunding police in the summer of 2020 and supporting a bail fund to let violent repeat offenders out of jail. Many of them went on to commit horrible crimes. And that same summer, her running mate opened his windows and marveled at the smell of his city being burnt down. And one of the most heart-wrenching part of hearing from victims, families, is when they lose a loved one, is that it could have been prevented. It's rarely a first-time offender. If the backlog of sexual assault kits had been processed, if they had served time for their prior crime, if they hadn't been let in through our porous border, their loved one would still be with them. And it's a gut punch, it's unfair, it's heartbreaking, and Americans need to stop putting up with it. No one's taking accountability for failing to keep the American people safe.
Thank you, Ms. Kiefer. Mr. Kessler, now recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member McBath, members of the committee, and also to the fellow panelists here. I also want to acknowledge Kylie Murdoch, a Third Way Policy Advisor, for her work on this issue, and also Jeremy, our fellow, who's done great work on this issue. I've been obsessed with crime since the 1976 All-Star Game in Philadelphia when I was mugged. And I've also had the privilege of working for a former chair and ranking member of the Crime Subcommittee, and now I get to testify. But I'm baffled by this topic. We're here to talk about soft on crime policies and have been offered up Minnesota under Governor Tim Walz and California under Attorney General Kamala Harris as object lessons, yet both of these states are safer than the rest of the country, or most of the rest of the country. I did not say safe, I said safer. 40 years ago, I had a gun pressed to my forehead in downtown Boston. 30 years ago, I had a gun leveled at my chest in rural Maine. No place in America is safe. But today, the murder rate in Minnesota under Tim Walz is 12th lowest in the nation. It is less than half that of the national average. It is lower than the murder rates of all the 11 members of the states of the subcommittee members here. If America had the same murder rate as Minnesota since the start of this century, there would be 186,000 more Americans alive today. If Arizona had the same murder rate as Minnesota since the start of the century, there would be 5,600 more Arizonans alive. There would be 12,800 more Floridians, 16,600 more Texans, 5,800 more South Carolinians. California, under AG Kamala Harris, had a murder rate also below the national average and a murder rate half that of red states like Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. If all of America had the same murder rate as California, from the start of this century, there would be 62,000 more Americans alive. If you look at what has made Minnesota and California successful relative to the rest of the nation, it is accountability, holding criminals accountable, and prevention, investing in efforts to give people a path away from crime. I'm going to touch briefly on 4 areas. Police funding. Minnesota ranks 10th in the nation in police spending per capita. California is number 1. Under Attorney General Harris, convictions rates hit a 15-year high. Across the nation, per capita spending on police is 33% higher in blue states than in red states. If you're not funding police and convicting criminals, you're soft on crime. Poverty. Strong correlation between poverty rates and crime. If you're not addressing poverty, you're soft on crime. Prevention programs. Most violent crimes are committed by people between the ages of 16 and 25. Many are mentally ill and on drugs. If you're not addressing substance abuse, mental health, idle kids, you're soft on crime. And guns. 86% of all murders are by guns. If guns are only seen as a solution to the crime problem and not a cause, if there isn't a balance between gun rights and gun accountability, you're soft on crime. Walz and Harris have successful results on crime because they check the accountability and prevention boxes. Police funding under Walz is up, and after the murder of George Floyd, he called on investments in community policing. Police funding under Biden-Harris, both federal law enforcement and local law enforcement, is also up. They each address poverty, school lunches, child tax credit, etc. They invested in substance abuse, mental health, after-school programs, and summer jobs. And within the confines of the Second Amendment, they each passed gun safety laws. A word about illegal immigration. It was soft on crime to not pass the bipartisan border security bill. That's water under the bridge. Studies show undocumented immigrants commit fewer violent crimes than the general population. I know people are skeptical of that study, and that, and that doesn't help people who were victims. But I want to say something that is irrefutable. The 3 states that have by far the highest murder rates in America, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, have among the lowest immigrant populations of any state in the country. The bulk of America's crime problem comes from Americans, not migrants. In 2020, the last year of the Trump administration, we had an unprecedented 30% spike in murders. By 2022, under Biden-Harris, crime and murder rates fell. It's continuing again in 2023 and 24. And for each year this century, each and every year this century, red states have had higher murder rates than blue states. I truly believe that Republicans believe they are tough on crime because they talk tough on crime. The results should make people skeptical.
Thank you, Mr. Kessler. Mr. Schultz, you are recognized for your 5 minutes.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here because the American people deserve to hear the unvarnished truth. Tim Walz's record on crime has left Minnesota in crisis. During his tenure, the state has become a place where criminals run free, where law enforcement is assailed, and where families are without the safety and security they deserve. Here's the question we all must ask. If Tim Walz can't protect his own backyard, how could we possibly trust him to protect the entire nation? In January 2021, my sister, a resident of Minneapolis, called me terrified. Her home had just been in the middle of a shootout involving a violent criminal. A police officer had to rush her out of her home, shielding her from stray bullets. Her home was left pockmarked with bullet holes, an experience far too many Minnesotans are now familiar with. Under Tim Walz, the streets of Minneapolis went from a place to walk your dog to a place to dodge gunfire. Let's go back to the summer of 2020 when the George Floyd protests spiraled into riots. As governor, Tim Walz refused to deploy the National Guard for days, allowing violence to escalate unchecked. While flames engulfed his cities, Walz twiddled his thumbs. By the time he finally acted, Minneapolis suffered over $500 million in damage, and his inaction inspired violence across the country. The riots were ultimately the second costliest in U.S. history. Those terrible days demonstrated that Tim Walz has at least mastered one skill: the art of standing idly by while his state spirals into chaos. Fast forward to today, violent crime is Tim Walz's legacy. Homicides have surged by 75%, and gunshot victims have doubled. Carjackings were once so rare in my state that they weren't separately tracked. Now there are hundreds every year. This surge in crime is not just a pile of statistics. It's a harsh reality affecting everyday lives and livelihoods. As the leader of the Minnesota Private Business Council, I've seen the impact firsthand. Businesses are closing left and right due to break-ins, theft, and vandalism. Large parts of Minneapolis and St. Paul, after decades of successful growth and investment, have become ghost towns, substantially driven by violent crime. Once a powerhouse renowned for generating companies like Target and Best Buy and General Mills, Minnesota now boasts the distinction of having the 6th slowest growing economy in the entire nation, of course driven meaningfully by its rate of violent crime. Worst of all, Walz has seen all this and sat idly. Case in point, Walz did nothing about the Minnesota Freedom Fund. The fund, which was endorsed by Kamala Harris, raised $40 million in 2020 to bail out countless violent criminals, including individuals charged with rape, assault, and attempted murder. One man, George Howard, who had been charged with domestic assault, murdered an innocent man named Luis Damian Martinez Ortiz just weeks after being bailed out. Thanks to Kamala Harris's favorite charity and Walz's tacit endorsement, violent offenders have received get-out-of-jail-free cards, and Minnesotans have paid the price with their lives. I have just scratched the surface of Tim Walz's ignoble record. He has refused to stand up to radicals in the Democrat Party who pushed to defund the police. He has refused to stand up to hard-left prosecutors who prosecute police for simply doing their jobs and excuse the criminality of violent criminals. And he has refused to protect our schools by forcing law enforcement out of them. As we consider the possibility of Tim Walz in the White House, we must ask ourselves, do we want a vice president whose legacy is defined by hesitation, cowardice, submission to radicals, and policies that have emboldened criminals, taken lives and scarred families, and broken entire communities? Absolutely not. Minnesotans deserve better than Tim Walz, and so does America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And now, I'm going to go to recognize Mr. Tiffany, the gentleman from Wisconsin, for his 5 minutes of questioning. So we're going to proceed with 5 minutes of questioning. They'll wrap up with their question, and if you're in the middle of giving an answer, don't worry, I'll let you go on to finish the answer, provided you're not filibustering. But, I mean, we'll go ahead and give you some time to respond. Mr. Tiffany.
Mr. Chairman, this hearing is so timely. Mr. Schultz, a Minnesota Senate panel was investigating the 2020 riots, and Minneapolis police officers said they were prepared to defend the city, but were instead instructed to stand down and let demonstrators take it. Do you think allowing the city to burn down while law enforcement watch was the right call?
It was not the right call. My sister, actually, during that time, this was prior to her incidents, she lived in Minneapolis at that time, and there were people who were stashing cans of gas under porches and so forth for later use during the riots. The fact that, yes, please.
Didn't Governor Walz have the ultimate authority to be able to deal with this issue by calling out the National Guard?
He did, and he sat on his hands for 3 days. It was the most, looking back on that time as a Minnesotan, I'm a fifth-generation Minnesotan. My roots go back very deep into the state. It was the most painful time in my state's history, in my memory. And we had a governor that watched everything happening, that watched his largest city, Minneapolis, descend into chaos, that watched other cities, including St. Paul and other cities, have incredible violence. And he sat on his hands while Minneapolis burned. It was an absolute disgrace. It was something for which Minnesota will be dealing with for decades, and Tim Walz was ultimately responsible for that incredible failure.
Mr. Ingram, on the night the 3rd precinct burned, I received a message from a very good friend of mine who managed a chain of restaurants in the Twin Cities area. And he sent a message to me at one point saying, could you call anyone, including the president, to try to get this under control? What was going through your mind that night as this friend of mine, his restaurant, burned down?
What I can say is our experience as a restaurant owner. We had the same thing. One of our restaurants became a staging ground for folks that were going into communities to steal from them. Our restaurant, The Gnome, has a large parking lot. SUVs with no license plates, trailers with no license plates, called our police. They said, unfortunately, we don't have the resources. We can't protect it. This is a 140-year-old firehouse that we had recently taken possession of. So me and my family went and posted up in our parking lot to protect our restaurant. We were then given information that we could not protect our business, that the direction was to flee. We can protect ourselves, but we cannot protect our business. So I understand the heartache of what he had to have been going through, and I also understand the heartache of Minnesotans over the death of George Floyd. But what is inexcusable is that we didn't act to save our community and to step up to save our community.
Is it any surprise to you, and perhaps you saw the news story, that in one of the counties I represent in western Wisconsin, St. Croix County, there was a sheriff's deputy that was shot as a result of soft on crime policies in the Twin Cities. A guy came out of the Twin Cities, repeat offender, came over, was drunk driving, got stopped, shot a sheriff's deputy in St. Croix County. Is it surprising at all that that happened?
My heart breaks for law enforcement in the Twin Cities. Unfortunately, out of our business, in the last year and a half, we've contributed to, I believe we're over $60,000 to help pay for the funerals of these first responders. We've donated 100% of every dollar of our sales to help pay for these funerals. What I can tell you is the men and women that I speak to on a daily basis are heartbroken. The rhetoric that goes around about these men and women on this day of all days, on 9/11, why these heroes are not celebrated and why this continues to happen in our city is unfathomable.
Mr. Schultz, yes or no? Are you surprised people are leaving Minnesota in droves at this point, in part because of the increase in crime?
I hear that story every day around the state, and I hope people will stay, but I understand it.
Are people in western Wisconsin right to be concerned that this crime wave in the Twin Cities may end up over in their back door as suburbs of the Twin Cities?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I grew up in the shadow of the Twin Cities in western Wisconsin. We were always proud to go to Minneapolis and St. Paul. I went to college at UW River Falls, and Minneapolis and St. Paul were two of the finest cities in America. Just like San Francisco, it is going downhill because of these soft on crime policies.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the whole committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But before that, Mr. Nadler, apparently Mr. Johnson has
I'd ask unanimous consent to submit for the record this article entitled, quote, Trump praised Minnesota Governor Walz in 2020 for response to unrest over Floyd's murder audio shows in which Trump is recorded saying, quote, what they did in Minneapolis was incredible. They went in and dominated and it happened immediately, end quote.
without objection.
And I'd also ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a research report from the Brennan Center for Justice entitled Bail Reform and Public Safety, data from 33 states across the country.
33 cities.
33 cities across the country.
Yeah.
Discredits the claim that bail reform causes crime to increase, and the accompanying methodological supplement.
Without objection.
And a letter from Kara Gosh, Executive Director of the Sentencing Project, and a report from the Sentencing Project entitled Incarceration and Crime, A Weak Relationship.
Without objection.
And Mr. Chairman, your skills in
Reading
my
over your shoulder.
homework are really great.
Yeah. I was a lawyer. I needed to read upside down.
Well, I had to do that myself from
Yeah.
time to time.
All right. And now, Ranking Member Nadler, yield five
Thank you,
minutes to you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kessler, in June of this year, you co-authored an opinion piece entitled Crime is Way Down, Why Aren't Democrats Talking About It? Now is as good a time as any, so let's talk about it. From your research, what have you found with respect to murder rates in the United States?
Well, one of the things that we've found, and if you look at over the last 23 years, from 2000 to 2022, murder rates in red states, the 25 red states, which we define as the states that voted for Donald Trump, and the 25 blue states that voted for Joe Biden, the murder rates in red states have been higher than the murder rates in blue states for every one of those 23 years, and in 2022, they were 33% higher.
And how about the trend in murder rates over those?
Murder rates spiked in 2020 under Donald Trump, whether it's his fault or not, who knows? They peaked in 2021, they've declined in 2022, they declined again in 2023, and they're declining again in 2024. The decline in 2023 was the largest one-year decline in murder rates in recorded history.
Thank you. And what have you found with respect to violent crime more broadly in the United States?
Violent crime is dropping in the United States. I would still say this is not a safe country, okay? We have 500 million guns in private hands. The stakes are very high, but violent crime is down.
And what have you found about crime rates generally, not just violent crime?
Crime rates are declining in America. They peaked again in 2020. Definitely an explosion in crime in 2020, crested in 2021, and then dropping in 2022 and 23, and they continue to be dropping now. Again, I would still say we are not a safe country. This is still a country that's not safe enough, but it's safer than it was.
And I think you may have answered this. How do these rates compare to across red states and blue states or cities?
Yeah, so look, in general, crime rates are higher in red states, not all red states, but typically 8 of the top 10 murder states are red states, and the very top are Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. They have murder rates that are 4 times the murder rates of places like, certainly Minnesota, probably twice the murder rate of California, 3 times the murder rate of New York.
Thank you. And are your findings in all of this research consistent with other authorities, such as the FBI, the Major City Chiefs Association, and the Council on Criminal Justice?
They are, and I just want to say on murders, we use the Center for Disease Control data because that is the most accurate on homicides, since every death has a cause of death with a death certificate.
And can you explain why accountability and prevention are important to responding to crime and more specifically to violent crime?
Look, I don't think you can solve crime doing just one thing. You're not going to incarcerate your way out of this problem, and you're not going to police yourself out of this problem, although those are both important. You know, you've got to prevent crimes before they happen. Most of the people who commit crimes are between the ages of 16 and 25, like making sure kids aren't idle. A lot of kids have emotional problems, mental health problems. There's substance abuse out there. Like, you just have to have a whole of person, whole of community approach to crime. I would say what is happening in red states, they really skimp on all the prevention side. There's an over-reliance on guns as being a solution to the crime problem and not how it can be part of the crime problem. And they also tend to fund police a little bit less than blue states.
And in your article, you said that voters want a balanced approach of accountability and prevention. You went on to say that's what the Democrats are doing. They're already walking the walk. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so if you look, we did public opinion polling on crime. We've done it several times and found some very interesting things. Voters believe you just need a dual approach. Like, they get it. They know that it's complicated. They see it in their neighborhoods. They're experiencing it. They see that Republicans are overly reliant on what they think is harsh on crime. Frankly, they think Democrats are overly reliant on prevention. I think Democrats are actually do both, but that's what voters believe. They want to see both because they think both parts work.
Thank you. I have 13 seconds left. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the chairman of the entire committee, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ingram, who told you you couldn't defend your property?
I believe it was our police chief who I was on the phone with that said, I believe it's a Minnesota statute, I believe is what I was told, that you can't protect your business with force. You can protect your home and your person, but not your business. And we were told that we needed to flee.
The state law that says you can't protect the property that you worked for, you invested in, your family put money into, that serves your community, being firebombed and looted and destroyed, you weren't allowed to protect it.
That is my understanding.
And you went to protect it. How were you going to protect it if, in fact, you were allowed to?
Yeah, so we showed up at our place of business armed. We showed up to protect our business.
Well, think about this. Think about this. You were told by your government you couldn't protect your property, and Mr. Kessler and Democrats want to take away your ability to protect yourself because they don't want you to have a gun. You can't make this stuff up.
You cannot.
I mean, this is where the left is today. Don't protect your business, even though the bad guys are looting it and burning it down. And oh, by the way, we also want to take your gun so you can't protect yourself, your kids, your wife, your family, people you care about in America with the Second Amendment.
Oh, I will tell you an instance where we had.
Well, oh, by the way, the people who told you that, you pay their salary.
We had an instance.
Such a deal the Democrats have for the American people.
Yeah, we had an instance where we had somebody that was flipping tables over, spitting on members of our team. The police were told they could do nothing about it. I came down from one of our other restaurants, went hands-on with the person, and was told that I would be the one that would go to jail.
You don't blame the police because they're busting their tail trying to deal with all this chaos going on. But your governor had the opportunity to call in the National Guard. The President of the United States told him he would do that if he wanted it, but he has to request it. And he waited how long to do it?
3 days.
3 whole days. Did you lose one of your businesses? One of your restaurants?
We did not lose our business by the grace of God. Our businesses were all affected. We had gunshot holes in our restaurants.
A lot of your friends and families or people in your community did lose businesses, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah, Mr. Tiffany talked about a friend of his who, I think it was a Wendy's restaurant, burnt to the ground.
It was truly heartbreaking what happened in Minnesota.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, Mr. Kessler and the Democrats want to take away your firearm. It's crazy. It's crazy. I yield to the chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
I yield back to the chairman.
Can I just
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
respond for 10 seconds?
No, sir,
on that?
you don't control the time. This is not an open forum, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll take that 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Because I mean, Mr. Ingram said doesn't care about statistics because these are personal issues that deal with real human beings. But we just heard a lot of statistical spouting that there are lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics, right? So let's consider this. So you got Columbus, Ohio. What do they show? They show a drop in violent crime of 41%. That's what they show. Now, why do they show that? Because our officers and the citizens they serve are still battling violent crime daily, but it's recent changes in crime reporting that have done little more than to create the illusion that all is well. If you recategorize violent crimes like aggravated assault, and you say this is a misdemeanor now, man, you're gonna really drive statistics down on violent crime. If you say we're not counted as a theft if it's not above $950, or in one of the towns in my state, $2,000, you're gonna drive your theft and burglary statistics down. They're gonna go down. And you're going to be saying, man, this is the best time. We've really seen an improvement in law enforcement. And if you're not counting everything, if you're not getting everything, the data, I mean, I'm going to introduce into the record later on here. I'm going to talk about it my next time. You're going to find that there are jurisdictions that have not received reporting requirements for like 6 months at a time. They're not even there. And then if you want to take about red states, take Phoenix out of Arizona and tell me what your murder rate is then. Because when that happens, it goes down precipitously. With that, I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for his 5 minutes. Microphone, brother.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Before the clock starts running, I would like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record this article from ABC News entitled FBI's latest data shows historic drop in crime. And I ask unanimous consent to submit this article from PolitiFact titled, quote, Joe Biden is correct that violent crime is near a 50-year low, end quote, Notably, that article and analysis are based on the FBI violent crime statistics from 2022, and we know violent crime has fallen even more since then.
Well, does it say that last part, does that say that in the title of the article?
I believe it,
I don't think it does,
it
brother.
may.
No, but is that the name of is that the name of the article? The answer is no. But without objection, we'll admit that, but that's not the,
Well, thank
that's
you,
not
sir.
the name of the article, brother.
I'm gonna start hiding my,
I don't, you know.
I'm gonna start shielding
I'd like
my
to play
work
cards
from-
with you, man. I
Well,
could probably show you cards
that's
like
right,
this.
yeah, you look at all my stuff. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue of crime is an important issue, but unfortunately it's been reduced to a political spectacle coming the day after a debate debacle by Donald Trump, followed by a very timely endorsement by Taylor Swift. So I am really humbled to be here today at this particular time when the future President of the United States acquitted herself so well last night, a former prosecutor. And Mr. Kessler, you talked about some statistics out of California that demonstrate the prowess of our presidential nominee, Kamala Harris. Could you go over some of those? And before you do that, though, I know you had some response that you were itching to get out, and please feel free to do that at this time.
Thank you, Congressman. I just want to say first, for the record, I believe in the Second Amendment right. I believe that it is an individual right. Those rights come with responsibilities. That's what the Heller decision was in 2005, and allow for reasonable restrictions. And if we have reasonable restrictions, I think this country would be a safer place.
But at this point, we don't have reasonable restrictions on things like assault weapons.
And I was working for Congressman Chuck Schumer when we passed the assault weapons ban, 216 to 214 in 1994. It was one of the highlights of my career.
And what were the impacts of crime during that 10-year period when the assault weapons ban was in place, violent crime?
So we saw a huge drop between 1994 and 2004 in murders and violent crime because of the assault weapons ban, because of the Brady Law, which passed in 1993, and I would also say because of the federal bipartisan crime bill that put more cops on the street and had a lot more after-school programs. Also had some tough sentencing in there, too, that not everybody liked. But it also had drug courts and other things to remove nonviolent criminals out of the court system and seek treatment. That type of whole of government, whole of person, whole of community approach seemed to work.
Well, the aspect of draconian sentences, though, has proved to not have been effective. So this tough on crime mentality of lock them up and throw away the key does not work. But things like poverty prevention, crime prevention policies, substance abuse and mental health, and stringent gun laws, those things have proven to be effective, have they not?
They have, and if you think of, most violent criminals are between the ages of 16 and 25. Like, if they have something to do, if they're dealing with their mental health issues, their substance abuse issues, their poverty, all those things, if you're doing those things, and also working to stop the illegal market in firearms that are funneling guns to underage kids, like those are things that you can do that can make a real difference.
Yeah, so the young man who took 4 lives last week at his high school in Georgia, he was not an immigrant, was he?
He was not. Most of the crimes in this country are committed by Americans.
And this young man had been gifted a AR-15 style assault weapon by his parent for Christmas, and he was only 14 years old, a child. What does that say about the gun culture that exists in this country that is so promiscuous with regard to guns on the street and in the hands of everyone. How does that affect crime?
It is a fact of life in the United States. There are about 500 million guns in private hands, okay? That's a lot. If the owners of those guns aren't treating them with the utmost responsibility, including themselves and their family members, like, there's going to be tragedies like this over and over and over again. And we've seen it. We've seen it.
Thank you. I've got 4 seconds to yield back, and I'll gladly do so.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nels, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much. A lot of this data, I mean, quite honestly, sickening. I was an old sheriff of Fort Bend County, Texas, big county outside of the city of Houston. Familiar with reporting crime. We had this crime data we would send. It was called the UCR, the Uniform Crime Report. We would send it. The FBI took it all, and now the FBI's changed it. Now it's called NIBRS, much more difficult. Many large cities. It's so confusing. Many large cities couldn't even comply with NIBRS to submit this crime data. Many agencies have failed to reach compliance. So the idea that crime is down is all malarkey. Chicago, LA, New York City failed to even report in 2021 because it's just too damn complicated. Matter of fact, what's interesting about the FBI in 2023 now, City of Baltimore, they claim they would know how many murders they have, right? They said we had 262 murders in Baltimore in 2023. The FBI reports 225. 2025. Now, why would they do that? So, Mr. Kessler, bad information. You got a lot of bad information. I want to say this. The 10, talking about dangerous cities in America, you look at St. Louis, Democrat run, long time, Democrat run. Detroit, Democrat run, long time. New Orleans, scary, don't go without a weapon. Democrat run. Memphis, go ahead with me. Democrat run. New York City, people leaving. Everybody wants to come to the great state of Texas. Florida, Democrat run. Milwaukee. Just if you want to say it with me, you can. Democrat run. Minneapolis. I feel for you, sir. I feel for you up there in that great state. You not only have a very liberal socialist as the governor up there, you also have a very liberal state house, state senate. Austin, Texas, Democrat run. San Francisco, Democrat run. Denver, Democrat run. And many of these individuals have the district attorneys that are supposed to prosecute these violent offenders and keep them locked up. George Soros funded DAs, letting them all out. I've got a graph here that shows incarceration rates in Minnesota, Minneapolis. Incarceration rates are down while crime is up. Crime is up. Violent crime is up. In Minneapolis, it's up in Minnesota. 2021, it reached its peak. You got a little bit, it's going down a little bit, but it's still very, very high. Because they don't want to put anybody in jail, don't want to offend anybody. Don't want to offend anybody. Let's not put the victims first. Let's put the suspects first. But I tell you something, the American people are seeing it. We had a hearing yesterday, Chairman, did we not, with families that lost loved ones due to the Kamala Harris border crisis. Border czar, she is. No, I'm not the border czar. I am the border czar. I'm not the border czar. Last night, we saw nothing but a bunch of lies, misinformation in that debate. But I think the American people can see through this. They see what's happening to our country with the invasion at the southern border. They can see it. And I tell you, they can see it in Minnesota. They can see it in Wisconsin. They can see it. Every state now, folks, is a border state. The criminals are coming through. Poor Colorado. That violent gang out of Venezuela, they're there. Whether they're eating ducks or chickens or cats or whatever, they're in India, I don't know, Indianapolis. But the problem is, is this administration, Kamala Harris, doesn't put the American people first, doesn't put individuals like you, sir, and your hardworking business, your family. They don't put them first. They put you last. They put you last. They put the American people last. And when you have to sit in these hearings yesterday and listen to the pain of these mothers that have lost their loved ones to brutal violence from these animals that this administration has let into this country, shame on them. But don't worry, I'll say this, miss. Help is on its way. The greatest president in my lifetime is coming back on November 5th because the American people can see through this charade with this dangerous, dangerous administration. I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple weeks ago, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, referred to California's crime policies as a national model. And Vice President Harris, of course herself from California, has said that California is a, quote, role model for what can be done around the country. So I think that this hearing, looking specifically at California's crime situation, is a timely opportunity to evaluate that thesis as to what kind of a national model California provides when it comes to its approach to crime. And that approach consists of three main elements. The first is a systematic effort to defund police departments in cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Oakland. Second, a systematic effort to not enforce criminal laws with the election of so-called progressive prosecutors like George Gascon, Kamala Harris, and Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, Gascon again in LA, Pamela Price in Oakland. And then thirdly is just taking a hatchet to the criminal code with laws like Prop 47, for example, which passed in 2014 and effectively legalized retail theft, spawning this crisis of retail theft and smash and grabs across California. Prop 47 also effectively legalized drug possession, even for Class A drugs, even for fentanyl. And what that has done is made it impossible for us to get folks who have drug addiction the help that they need, so that you have them just living on our streets and tragically all too often dying on our streets in these open-air drug markets that you have to walk through, wade through in many of our major cities. 2 years after Prop 47 came Prop 57, which made tens of thousands of very serious, heinous criminals eligible for early release. Now, of course, California voters would never have passed such a thing if it were properly described to them. But unfortunately, the initiative was described on the ballot as only applying to nonviolent offenders. It was described as such by the then Attorney General, Kamala Harris. In reality, it made criminals eligible for early release who had committed crimes like rape, human trafficking with minors, assault with a deadly weapon, drive-by shootings. All of this was described as nonviolent activity by the Attorney General. And so with the passage of these measures, Prop 47, Prop 57, the defunding of police, the so-called progressive prosecutor movement, we have seen crime go up in California. The results speak for themselves. Just over the last 5 years, violent crime has gone up 15.1%, aggravated assault 30.6%, homicide 9.1%, aggravated assault with a firearm 62.9%. The violent crime rate in California is 31% higher than the rest of the country. But those statistics don't even tell the full story. If you look at San Francisco, for example, businesses are closing left and right. In just a short span of time in the last year, you had the closure of Nordstrom, Whole Foods, T-Mobile, Anthropologie, Saks, the iconic toy store that this movie Toy Story was based on had to close. In-N-Out had to close its first restaurant ever, citing the danger to customers and to their workers. Or if you just walk into, many of our major cities, you have to, if you want to go to the grocery store, you have to dodge needles, you have to wade through encampments. And when you go into the store, if you want to buy basic goods like, frozen foods or shampoo or conditioner, you have to go get a clerk to open up the cabinet to get it for you because everything is under lock and key. In Los Angeles, the police has specifically warned people that you shouldn't go outside when you are wearing jewelry. This is the reality of life in many parts of California following this dangerous decriminalization experiment. But the good news is this, that while Gavin Newsom says this is a national model, while Kamala Harris says it's a role model for the rest of the country, the people of California are rendering a very different verdict. Those cities that defunded their police have now refunded their police. Several of these so-called progressive prosecutors have been recalled or are currently being recalled or being removed from office. And there is a bipartisan initiative right now to largely reverse Prop 47 and end the Prop 47 experiment in California. And it has received broad bipartisan support. I was just on a bipartisan panel supporting it with our colleague Ami Bera. The mayors of San Jose, San Diego, San Francisco are supporting this initiative, even though the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has continued to stand by Prop 47 and fought our reform effort every step of the way. So, Mr. Chairman, while there are some who will point to California's crime policies as a national model, I would encourage folks across the country to listen to the people of California themselves, who are saying very clearly this is not a model for the nation, it is a warning to the nation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Yeah, I had questions for Mr. Ingram, but that was a remarkable presentation from Congressman Kiley about how things have gone in California. And when I heard that they had to close an In-N-Out and a Whole Foods, that is a broad swath of the constituency in California. When you get both of those establishments having to close, it's remarkable. Mr. Ingram, so we have this dynamic now that Mr. Kiley just laid out perfectly, where you're seeing more and more crimes not really being counted as crimes. And you're seeing more and more criminals just being let out and not really deemed part of the criminal justice system for any meaningful period of time. And so I want you to bring like the average American who's heard the presentation, that crime rates are down, we're safer now under these policies that don't really punish people for things like theft. Like, what does that actually mean on the streets of America? What would you say to an American that encountered that information, but it didn't jive with how they felt?
What I would equate it to is we see it every day in our city, where we sit right now. It's mind-boggling on how we talk about crime. For us, again, somebody that has been in Minnesota since 2012, the 5 years we had one burglary. Now we've had 12, 13. Every time I get a thing from our district attorney, it says we've reduced the charges to under $1,000. Even though it may have cost me $20,000 to repair the building, a safe, they rolled down 3 flights of stairs, ripped out walls, ripped out staircases. We reduced it down to under $1,000. And the person is back on the streets, and he robs us again, and we reduce it down, and he robs us again, and we reduce it down. To me, that is the madness of it. Recently, our breakfast restaurant called Hope. Somebody broke into it, busted out the garage door, went into the space, and then we get a letter saying we've reduced the crime down to under $1,000, where the glass on the garage door costs more than that. It's to me, it's when we have these, again, this isn't a political thing for me. It's real life. This is real humans. These are real businesses. We're having businesses close every single day. We're having people murdered. We have a drug dealer that provided laced drugs with fentanyl to my partner's son. He died. He texted him, something is wrong. He said, you'll be fine. We had his address. That drug dealer, to my knowledge, is still on the streets to this day.
Mr. Ingram, Vice President Harris filled out a questionnaire for the ACLU when she was running for president back in 2019, and she advocated for the position of decriminalizing fentanyl, making it where that wasn't something where people would interface with the criminal justice system but would have a different path. Do you think that would make your streets safer?
I don't believe that will make our streets safer. People, you must be held accountable for your actions. Words don't really matter. Actions matter. We can all say, I can sit here and say whatever I want to say, any of us can say. Actions are what matter. What is happening every single day is what matters, and that's really what we need is common sense to take over. If you've been arrested 50 times in 3 years, you shouldn't be out to do it again.
Here's what I don't get, Mr. Ingram. Why do people, I've never been a prosecutor, but why would you want to become a prosecutor to then not prosecute the criminals? That'd be like opening restaurants and not wanting to make food. That'd be like opening a bar and not wanting to make drinks. Like, do you ever get to talk to some of these folks in your community and say, hey, like, I just sort of assumed that me being the restaurateur, I would run a restaurant, and you being the prosecutors, you would prosecute the criminals. Is that too much to ask?
Yeah, unfortunately, I just get to speak to our first responders that show up on site, and I see the look in their eyes, how defeated they are, because they've arrested, they know them by name. We show them the picture, and they tell us their name. They know where they live, and they're so demoralized and defeated. It's insanity.
Well, we don't live like this in Florida. You don't have to live like this. Florida's ready when you are, as a matter of fact. But I do worry that these bad ideas that we've seen emerge in some of our Democrat-run cities could spread to other parts of the country. And in our last few seconds, what would be your warning to a community thinking about adopting these policies that reduce theft thresholds and allow this type of conduct?
My biggest thing would say, love people. And love is hard. My dad had to discipline me because I made mistakes. Discipline sucks, but it has to happen. Love people, and that includes discipline.
That's terrific advice. I very much appreciate you being here, and I see my time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I'll turn to you, Ms. Kiefer. What changes would you like to see to ensure that victims are better protected and offenders are held accountable? And you have a microphone button there.
Yeah. Prosecutors need to prosecute.
Oh,
Okay.
there we go.
There.
Yeah.
All right. Prosecutors need to prosecute. You know, people need to be held accountable. Gun laws need to actually be enforced. Instead of taking away guns, why don't we enforce the laws on the books?
So you think that law enforcement, by enforcing laws, you get deterrence, and people are less likely to commit the crime? Interesting. Interesting concept.
Crazy.
You know, we were just in El Salvador. We saw that. They arrested 70,000 gang members, and now they have the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's an interesting thing down there in El Salvador when they chose to start enforcing the law. And Mr. Ingram, I have a question for you. When you were talking about the police come out, they know who it is, they make the arrests, and now the prosecutor reduces the charges. Now, in Arizona, we have something called the Victims' Bill of Rights. And if that's going to happen, typically, there's going to be a consultation with the victim and say, this is why, or, you know, some kind of information. Did you get that from the prosecutor there?
I did not. I did get a letter from an advocate saying, this is happening. We responded and said, we're not in agreement. And then we would get a letter in the mail a month or two later that's saying, here's what happened. And
so Mr. Ingram, in Arizona, we also would say, we're going to have this individual's pled, you're the victim. If you wish to make a statement or submit something to the court, and you could come in for the sentencing is going to be XYZ date, none of that happened for you?
That's never happened to me.
Did that happen for you, Ms. Kiefer, in your case?
To testify against?
Yeah, you testified. You actually testified. Okay. Mr. Schultz, what changes to your business? Do you have a business in?
I do not, no,
Okay.
no.
So what's the crime rates doing to the business community in Minnesota? Particularly
So
Minneapolis, St. Paul.
there's a lot of ways to cut that, but from a statistical perspective, Minnesota is at its slowest growing period in its history. We're growing incredibly slowly. We're losing people. We're losing businesses to other states. One of the causes of that is clearly the violent crime.
It's an amazing thing to me, and I don't know why we got the music going. That's wild. But here, I'm going to submit for the record an article called 4 Reasons We Should Worry About Missing Crime Data Without Objection. So here we go. 2022 crime data. How many reported, and Mr. Nels talked about it, but I wanted to put an article about this. Agencies that participated and actually reported it, 8,358. That was 44% of agencies. How many participated partially? And like he said, it's so complex. Some participated for part of it, not all of it. Another 4,400, or about 24%. But how many agencies didn't participate at all, including some of the nation's largest cities? 6,097, 32% of all. They didn't even participate. So when you give us statistical data, based on, as my colleague was mentioning, the FBI statistics, they don't even get all the statistics. So I know, and I respect Mr. Ingram, who says, well, you know, we need to take the people part of it too. But as policymakers, we also look at the data. And the data is woefully inaccurate because it's woefully incomplete. That's the reality of it. And then, how much data is analyzed to say, this number, like in your case, how many cases were dropped down and busted down? I was a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I'll tell you that 95% of cases plead out. 95% of cases are busted down from the original charge. And so we don't know what's being charged and how they're breaking them down. A cop is shot in the United States every 22 hours this year. Every 22 hours, police officers shot. And I submit that for the record without objection. I submit a document called the Blue City Murder Problem, which gets at the point I was trying to make. What's Arizona's homicide rate when you take Phoenix out of it? Not just all Maricopa County, which has 6 million people in it. When you take out Phoenix, the rest of Maricopa County is pretty darn safe. That's the reality. And that's the blue state problem that, again, that Mr. Nels brought up. And then I'm going to submit also for the record in my last act here this morning, I'm looking for the title of it. Here we go. Violent crime creating dystopian hell despite Biden's claim America is safer. Without objection, that'll come in. We have no more members to ask questions, and all of you have participated, and we appreciate all of your testimony today. Thank you for being here, and with that, we are adjourned.